So I picked up this damaged Flying Vee for not a lot of money. It's had a really nasty neck break. Well, in fact, it's had several, and I'll show you. The first one was a multiple crack in this area, and then the second one, they did it so bad that they bent the truss rod. As you can see, pretty nasty. They splinted this too, routed in some splints. But the truss rod is pretty badly damaged, and I think I'm going to need to replace it because it looks like they've tried to hammer it back into place. And you can feel it's weak, like you could snap that right off, metal fatigue sort of thing. So looks like I'm going to have to remove the fretboard and route in new material and just take it one step at a time. Not sure of the age. The serial number is there if you catch it in the right light, and I can probably redefine that and get more information from it. So that's where we are really. So this is the first stage, evaluating what I need to do. I have all the parts for it, so nothing's missing. I've got the plastic, etc. All right, wish me luck. So as you can see, the fretboard is starting to come up pretty nicely. We do that by applying heat directly to the frets, leaving it on there for half an hour maybe, and protecting your paint with a clean sheet of paper. If you were to use any kind of tape or something, you run the risk of the glue fusing together with the finish. So I just use clean paper and just take it easy, one side at a time. And there she is, removed. All came off nice and clean without any big chips. There's two plastic dowels on these that locate the fingerboard, and you can just power through those with your scraper. So a little bit about the scrapers. These are drywall scrapers. I wouldn't use something with a cutting edge on it because you might kind of veer off into the wood. But if it's not moving, just keep that heat on there and be patient and carry on, and eventually it's going to soften up enough for you to slice through it or to move through the wood glue. So I'm using my oscillating tool to cut through this filler material down to the truss rod, just to make it cleaner to get the thing out, to get this filler out. So with that slot cut in there, it gives me room to push this softer material inwards, and you can pry it and then get a chisel and just gently work along the length of it. So I've decided that the cleanest way to get this tab that sinks down in here out without damaging the wood is to bend the truss rod up and then place something underneath it, and then lever the truss rod against what I've placed underneath it, and that should work that tab out of there very gently. And that actually worked like a charm, as you can see. That lever under there, and then using the bent truss rod against the lever, pulled it out without me having to cut any material. So the truss rod came out really nicely. I'm going to order a new one. I can get the exact replacement from StewMac, or I've got the option of the dual action double truss rod, which would add stability to the whole neck. So I'm really thinking about that at the moment. I'll let you know. So my next step is to fix the two pieces together just enough that it's in the right place and sturdy enough that I can start routing and putting material in. So all the joints have to be clean before I can glue together, because this has been repaired 2, maybe 3 times. So I got a adhesive remover there, and I'm brushing that on, and then I'm going to clean it all out, clean the pores right out with this steel brush. Right, so I've cleaned up the surfaces and they're all nice and porous again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue it together with titebond. I'm going to hold it by hand until the titebond sets up. So I'll probably be here like 15-20 minutes. I'm going to put the fingerboard back on with some tape where the glue might touch it, just so I can level it up and get a good square with a nut on there, so I know I've got everything done properly. So yep, so this is the tricky part. It's the kind of thing you need 3 hands for. There's not a good point to put a clamp on, and I know the titebond should set up good enough for me to just good enough for the next step. So I've been debating the best way to route this, and what I've come up with is, I mean, you can make a router box and set it at an angle so that you start just a couple of millimeters below the face plate and then come in at an angle right at the back there. And then I've got this material here, obviously I have to fix too. But because the Flying Vee truss rod cover is so big, and because I've got a fair amount of damage already on the headstock overlay, as you can see here, it's not great. I do have the opportunity of routing into the overlay on both sides, because, as I said, what I do there is going to be covered by the truss rod cover. So I'm weighing that up as an option. I think it would be a really strong, super strong repair if I came in all the way through, like back to kind of here, and put in some quarter sawn pieces and glued it up. I think that would be about as solid as it's going to get. And then that leaves me a good option to fix this too, because then I can it's going to be solid and I can cut down deeper into this to replace it if I need to. So as you can see, I've mounted the guitar face down on a piece of MDF, centered, and locked it into place with these rubber straps that I made from automotive fuel hose. Actually, it might be vacuum hose. So this gives me a good base to build up a platform for a good solid routing jig. Better put wedges in the back to support the body. So here's the jig I made. So the guitar is strapped down onto MDF. This bottom piece I think runs to about there, just before the nut area. And I've used rubber tubing with masking tape underneath, because you know rubber can have a funny effect on nitrocellulose. But this is pin flat, so there was a slight bow in the neck, but I've pinned it flat before I routed, so that when I put my material in, it will keep to a nice flat area. So I built up the routing deck by, I cut 2 pieces of wood like this either side. This is 3/4 MDF, and then I shimmed it at the back to get a slight bit of angle, and then I used this as the fence and these as the stops, because I've got a round base, sub base on my router. Ideally you want a square base and then have a fence either side with a slightly higher material to slot it in, so that when you plunge, it's it's not so risky. Plunging wasn't too risky on this because I got a bad area anyway, so I could visually took the router piece down in that bad area before I move backwards and forwards, because this is going to be routed some more later with a more shallow plate on there. So the first pass I did with a 5/16, and I did that in about 5 passes, and I wasn't really too happy with it. Mainly because I had made a rookie mistake of changing the speed of the route a bit as I was going, and so I got an inconsistent width of cut, because the faster the route a bit goes, the less material it takes off. So I slowed it all the way down to 1 for the last pass, and I put a bigger 3/8 bit in and just cleaned the whole thing up. So I got a ton of material to glue to. I'm through the headstock plate, the overlay, but I'm not too worried about that, as I said before, because it's a Flying Vee with one of the great big truss rod covers on it, which will cover that. So yeah, so I'm pretty pleased. It's turned out pretty well. Got a ton of material to bond everything together with, and that should be a good strong repair when I'm finished. So I got myself some premium quarter saw mahogany, and I'm going to even make it stronger than it already is by cutting in line with the grain. See, there's a slight angle there, so I'm going to cut my fillets in that angle so I've got a straight up and down grain. So now my plugs are within a mil and a half of the size. I'm going to sand them down the rest. So I don't have a planer, so this is MDF. Short pieces of MDF are very stable and straight. This is screwed down to this board, and I've used spray glue on the back and on the MDF to keep that nice and flat. And I will measure it with my vernier gauge as I go and take it from there. I've not cut these exactly to length yet because I want to get the best fit, and then I'll look at doing the rounded ends. So I use this punch, which just happens to be the right diameter, to transcribe that mark on there on both sides. Obviously make sure this is dead square before you start, and then just gently file and take an even amount off as you go across here, and check both sides as you go. And then afterwards I'll get a strip of sandpaper and do the old shoe shine back and forth on there to get a nice round edge. And there they are, nice and snug, but not too tight that they would force the angle of the headstock to change. But they're bottomed out nicely. So I'm going to trim them back a little bit before I glue them. Obviously I'll make a pencil mark. So there she is, clamped up, all nice and snug. I went with Titebond Ultimate because I was going to use hide glue, but my hide glue bottle is 2 years old, and there is a shelf life for it. And I have tried to separate Titebond Ultimate before, and the wood just splits off around it. It doesn't, the glue never breaks, so I'm quite happy with that. Right, so now I'm getting ready to do this shallow route and replace this damaged material here. The way that I've done that is to build this deck up to the right level with pieces of 3/4 MDF, and I'm going to use my larger router, my plunge router here, with a 3/4 bit, and I'm going to put another guide on this side so that it will just run up and down in that slot. Luckily I'm already set up to do this because I make cabinets. So here I am making this bridging piece, and I actually found that an automotive socket fits exactly the shape that I need, so I've used that to make my template. Made my mark, and I'm going to do that. I've got that done both sides, and I'm just going to do that by sanding it away on this strip that I have glued to this flat board in this direction, just carefully watching what I'm doing. So it's getting there. I use files to take most of the material down, and then I like to use a new blade just held in the hand at probably about 80 degrees, working Well, you find out when you start on the wood which way it wants to be scraped and just stick to that. So what I did was I took the profile, drew that out on both sides. It's pretty difficult to do holding a phone. And then just made sure I didn't cross that line. Did this flat first to the same level as this, and then drew this line in, and then started to profile in either side of that line with the blade. That's my method anyway. Right, so I'm at the process of grain filling, and I use aqua coat for that. And basically I put it on and leave it for a few hours, and then sand it flat with 800 wet and dry. You can do that multiple times, and then after that I'll seal it with shellac, and then I'll get into the colouring. But to get to this stage, various files and sharp blades are the way I like to get there. So I file, then I scrape, I file, then I scrape, and make careful pencil marks to, look at the profile I'm making and measurements and things like that, and then sanding. So just take your time. As you can see, the protruding pieces I shaped off just by masking the area and using a series of graded files. Got most of it down with a rougher one, and then finer and finer as I went, and then some wet and dry. And this will have nitrocellulose lacquer when it's finished. Reshaped in here, got it back to the original shape. On the other side, I've put some seal coats with a little bit of colour on the repair that I did. I'm waiting for my order to come through from StewMac with the correct stain colour, so that I can build that up and make it look good. And then we'll flip it over and start working on the top side after I've done that. So here we are, my StewMac order has arrived. I've got the correct tone dye to finish that. It's all nicely shaped where it needs to be. I've taken these two top inserts down and cleaned out the truss rod adjustment slot to where it should be. I'll finish that off with black nitrocellulose, and then the truss rod cover will go over that. Got my new truss rod, proper Gibson style. I have my 2 carbon fibre rods that will be routed in the neck. I have the epoxy to set them down with, slow cure epoxy. I've got a bone nut, and I've got the router bit. So plenty to get on with. So I'm getting ready to put the truss rod in. I've got the neck clamped flat on the board there, so that when I glue my fill piece in, it's going to try and keep to a true flat surface. So the truss rod, the original Gibson one had a plastic sleeve on it, so I've used heat shrink, and I've just shrunk it enough so that the rod still turns inside pretty freely. So the idea is if I get glue on this, it's still going to be able to turn inside this sleeve. So I've been doing a bit of research on the truss rod route with the one-way truss rods, and you should have a larger gap around this, or a larger depth around the 7th fret, tapering off either side. Not seeing that. I think maybe because a lot of the material was missing in here, and I've replaced it with new stuff, and it's slightly lower. So I'm using extra slow setting epoxy to bring the gap up. Rather than dig deeper, I'd rather put more material in. So I'm going to create the bow. And when I set it, I've since, after doing some research, found that Gibson built a small amount of relief, 20 thousandths, into the neck when they set it all up, so that it's designed to work under some truss rod load. So I may not be fitting the graphite because that might mess with the whole thing. But my first step is to get this truss rod route in the correct bow for the material for the rod to push on to take out the excess relief. So she's on the table having the filler piece glued in over the truss rod. So a quick explanation on that. When the truss rod is in there, there's a filler piece on top of it that's cut to the profile. So the truss rod route you do on a curve, and it's got to do it as equally as you can. My problem was, because I put a lot of material in on the headstock end, that this curve was gone, so I had to channel this out equal to the curve on this side. I've put a bend in this just to give you an idea what it's like, but normally the filler piece will fit on top, flush with the top of the neck, and as you tighten your nut on this end, the steel rod tries to take its curve out, and it pushes against the filler piece, and that's what gives you the adjustment in the neck. So to get the shape of the filler piece, you have to clamp it in the slot and then mark what you have left. And then when you pull it out, you just flip it over and cut along your mark, and you've got a perfect piece to go in there. So that's gluing and clamping. And then I'll take it to the next step. Oh, I actually put a plastic sleeve over the truss rod so that any glue wouldn't get down and stop me from actually adjusting it. So there's the walnut filler strip in there and levelled off. To level it off, I use a razor blade with the sides taped so that you're only taking material off of this. And then I run up and down the whole thing holding a very fine file flat. Make sure the metal is not higher than the surface, obviously, and nothing's higher than the surface. And then I use the Pro Strength Goof Off glue remover. Obviously, don't soak it. Put it on a paper towel and just rub it in the areas that are still glossy. Obviously, don't get it down in that truss rod because you just glued that in. And then very light dusting with a 100 grit sandpaper to key it ready for some glue. So a little explanation of this jig I've set up. So I've got the body elevated off the table and strapped down flat. And at this end, I've got a clamp that I can micro adjust because I want to set in just a tiny bit of neck relief, like 20 thou or something like that. You can actually see that the holes here are slightly larger on the front, so that that gives you kind of a micro adjust. I guess that's what their plan was. So if you come around the front as well, I've got a rod on there and I can dial in to make sure that it's not twisted. I can change these, and that affects how much twist is in there. So I can get that dead straight as well, although clamping a flat board, two flat boards together should really give you zero twist. But yeah, so that's where I am. So I've got everything ready to glue. Okay, well, the neck's set up really nicely. Let's have a recap and run through that. I'll tell you what I did, now I achieved that. Initially, I was concerned because without the fretboard on there was quite a significant bow in the neck. And after taking advice from an old 70-year-old luthier that's been building since he was 18, he told me, what they did was put the neck under tension and then planed it flat and then fitted the board. What that does, it creates an upwards tension that the truss rod counteracts. The truss rod and the fingerboard counteracts in this direction. So you've got opposing forces. Like a good analogy would be firing a gun, a powerful handgun. It's not a hobby of mine, but somebody insisted that I fire their Desert Eagle down in Arizona, out on his land, and it was explained to me that you push towards the gun and also pull the gun towards you with the other hand, and that creates stability so that when you fire it doesn't recoil and knock you over. Well, it's the same situation going on here, opposing forces. And so what I did was I jigged the neck down flat and then released it slightly, so I had about 0.5 millimeter of relief in it, and then set and glued the fingerboard down on that. I used hide glue because it's reversible if you make a mistake, and yeah, it's worked out perfectly. So the truss rod has to, if I slacken the truss rod right off, there's a very slight up bow, and then you just pull that into spec with a little bit of pressure, and that brings it perfectly flat. And then if you keep going, it brings in a down bow. So there's never a dead spot in the truss rod. So you've got, like, you know, as perfectly stable as it can be. So I'm really pleased with that. So I'm going to start on the finishing process. I've got a HVLP sprayer and I've got a 1mm nozzle. Really, it should be smaller. An airbrush would be perfect for this kind of job. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in some black dye mixed in alcohol and a little bit of shellac to disguise this area. And then I've got the correct liquid stain that I've mixed into some shellac and alcohol to colour it on top of the black. So I won't be going any darker than that. I did actually mix some of the red dye into the black with more shellac, so it would build up. But when I hit that back a little bit before I put the nitrocellulose on, it will lighten up considerably. But that's all I need colour wise to put on there.